Control. Donald Gennaro stared at Hammond. Sitting in the deserted cafeteria, the man was spooning ice cream, calmly eating it. So, Muldoon believes the children are somewhere in the park. He thinks so, yes. Then I am sure we'll find them. I hope so, Gennaro said. He watched the old man deliberately eating, and he felt a chill. Oh, I am sure we'll find them. After all, I keep telling everyone this park is made for kids. Gennaro said, just so you understand that they're missing, sir. Missing? He snapped. Of course I know they're missing. I'm not senile. He sighed and changed tone again. Look, Donald, Hammond said. Let's not get carried away. We've had a little breakdown from the storm or whatever. And as a result, we've suffered a regrettable, unfortunate accident. And that's all that's happened. We're dealing with it. Arnold will get the computers cleaned up. Muldoon will pick up the kids, and I have no doubt he'll be back with them by the time we finish this ice cream. So let's just wait and see what develops, shall we? Whatever you say, Sir Gennaro said. Why? Henry Root said, looking at the console screen. Because I think Nedry did something to the code, Arnold said. That's right, I'm checking it. Alright, Drew said. But have you tried your options? Like what? Arnold said. I don't know. Aren't the safety systems still running? Drew said. Key checks all that? Jesus, Arnold said, snapping his fingers. They must be safety systems. Can't be turned off except at the main panel. Well, Rue said, if Keychecks is active, you can trace what he did. I sure as hell can, Arnold said. He started to press buttons. Why hadn't he thought of it before? It was so obvious. The computer system at Jurassic Park had several tiers of safety systems built into it. One of them was the keycheck program, which monitored all the keystrokes entered by operators with access to the system. It was originally installed as a debugging device, but it was retained for its security value. In a moment, the keystrokes that Nedry had entered into the computer earlier, and that they were listed in a window on the screen. 13, 42, 121, 32, 88, 77, 19, 13, 122, 13, 44, 52, 77, 90, 30, 99, 13, 100, 13, 109, 55, 103, 144, 13, 99, 87, 60, 13, 44, 12, 9, 13, 43, 63, 13, 46, 57, 89, 103, 122, 13, 44, 52, 88, 931, 13, 21, 13, 57, 98, 100, 102, 103, 13, 11, 12, 112, 13, 146, 13, 13, 13, 77, 67, 88, 23, 13, 13. System, Nedry. Go to command level. Nedry. 040XY67 and Mr. Goodbytes. Security. Key check. Off. Safety. Off. SL. Off. Security. White Rabbit OBJ. That's it, Arnold said. He was screwing around here for hours, it seemed like. Probably just killing time, you said. Until he finally decided to get down to it. The initial list of numbers represented the ACSII keyboard codes for the keys Nedry had pushed at his console. Those numbers meant he was still within the standard user interface, like any ordinary user of the computer. So initially, Nedry was just looking around, which he wouldn't have expected of the programmer who had designed the system. Maybe he was trying to see if there were changes before he went in, Ruth said. Maybe, Arnold said. Arnold was now looking at the list of commands, which allowed him to follow Nedry's progression through the system line by line. At least we can see what he did. System was Nedry's request to leave the ordinary user interface and access the code itself. The computer asked for his name, and he replied Nedry. That name was authorized to access the code, so the computer allowed him into the system. Nedry asked to go to command level, the computer's highest level of control. The command level required extra security, and asked Nedry for his name, access number, and password. Nedry, 040XY67 and Mr. Goodbytes. Those entries got Nedry into the command level. From there he wanted security, and since he was authorized, the computer allowed him to go there. Once at the security level, Nedry tried 3 variations: key checks off, safety off, SL off. He's trying to turn off the safety systems, we said. He doesn't want anybody to see what he's about to do. Exactly, Arnold said. And apparently he doesn't know it's no longer possible to turn the systems off, except by manually flipping the switches on the main board. After 3 failed commands, the computer automatically began to worry about Nedry. But since he had gotten in with proper authorization, the computer would assume that Nedry was lost, trying to do something he couldn't accomplish from where he was. So the computer asked him again where he wanted to be, and Nedry said security, and he was allowed to remain there. Finally, Ruth said, here's the kicker. He pointed to the last of the commands Nedry has entered. Right Rabbit OBJ. What the hell is that? Arnold said. White Rabbit? Is that supposed to be his private joke? It's marked as an object, Ruth said. In computer terminology, an object was a block of code that could be moved around and used, the way you might move a chair in a room. An object might be a set of commands to draw a picture, or to refresh the screen, or to perform a certain calculation. Let's see where it is in the code, Arnold said. Maybe we can figure out what it does. He went to the program utilities and typed find White Rabbit OBJ. The computer flashed back. Object not found in the libraries. It doesn't exist, Arnold said. Then search the code listing, Ruth said. Arnold typed find listings White Rabbit OBJ. The screen scrolled rapidly, the lines of code blurring as they swept past. It continued this way for almost a minute, and then abruptly stopped. There it is, Ruth said. It's not an object, it's a command. The screen showed an arrow pointing to a single line of code. QRV equals get hand SSMDT temp ragging item DD2. Here H equals get handle SSDITL temp range 2 item DD4. Andrometer GN get shop value object to limit val dx val. A valid meter MH meter V is returned. A meter handy VGT throwback TY return. Limit data 4. Max equals max bets 33% to limit 0.04 set on. Limit data 5 equals set 0 set 5 0 limit 2 vericize on White Rabbit OBJ call link SST. Security perimeter set to off. Foot range equals max range plus set lim. Temp VGN FDN minus and BB plus $404. All range equals max range set lim to temp HN VDD and 2 plus $105. Void draw meter send screen object print. Son of a bitch, Arnold said. Wu shook his head. It isn't a bug in the code at all. No, Arnold said. It's a trap door. The fat bastard put in what looked like an object call, but is actually a command that links the security and perimeter systems and then turns them off. Gives them complete access to every place in the park. Then we must be able to turn them back on, Wu said. Yeah, we must, Arnold frowned at the screen. All we have to do is figure out the command. I'll run an execution trace on the link, he said. We'll see where that gets us. Wu got up from his chair. Meanwhile, he said, that somebody went into the freezer about an hour ago. I think I better go count my embryos. Ellie was in her room about to change out of her wet clothes when there was a knock on the door. Alan? She said, but when she opened the door, she saw Muldoon standing there with a plastic-wrapped package under his arm. Muldoon was also soaking wet, and there were streaks of dirt on his clothes. I'm sorry, but we need your help, Muldoon said briskly. The lane cruisers were attacked an hour ago. We brought Malcolm back, but he's in shock. He's got a very bad injury to his leg. He's still unconscious, but I put him in the bed in his room. Harding is on his way over. Harding, she said. What about the others? We haven't found the others yet, Dr. Sattler, Muldoon said. He was speaking slowly now. Oh my God. But we think that Dr. Grant and the children are still alive. We think they went into the park, Dr. Sattler. Went into the park? We think so. Meanwhile, Malcolm needs help. I've called us Harding. Shouldn't you call the doctor? There's no doctor on the island. Harding's the best we have. But surely you can call for a doctor, she said. No, Muldoon shook his head. Phone lines are down. We can't call out. He shifted the package in his arm. What's that? She said. Nothing. Just go to Malcolm's room and help Harding if you will. And Muldoon was gone. She sat on her bed, shocked. Alice Sadler was not a woman disposed to unnecessary panic, and she had known Grant to get out of dangerous situations before. Once he'd been lost in the Badlands for 4 days when a cliff gave way beneath him, and his truck fell 100 feet into a ravine. Grant's right leg was broken. He had no water, but he walked back on a broken leg. On the other hand, the kids... She shook her head, pushing the thought away. The kids were probably with Grant, and if Grant was out in the park, well, what a better person to get them safely to Jurassic Park than a dinosaur expert. In the park. I'm tired, Lex said. Carry me, Dr. Grant. You're too big to carry, Tim said. But I'm tired, she said. Okay, Lex, Grant said, picking her up. Oof, you're heavy. It was almost 9 p.m. The full moon was blurred by drifting mist, and their blunted shadows led them across an open field, toward dark woods beyond. Grant was lost in thought, trying to decide where he was. Since they had originally crossed over the fence that the Tyrannosaur had battered down, Grant was reasonably sure they were now somewhere in the Tyrannosaur paddock, which was a place he did not want to be. In his mind, he kept seeing the computer tracing of the Tyrannosaur's home range. The tight squiggle of lines that traced his movements within a small area. He and the kids were in that area now. But Grant also remembered that the Tyrannosaurs were isolated from all the other animals, which meant they would know they had left the paddock when they crossed a barrier, a fence, or a moat, or both. He had seen no barriers so far. The girl put her head on his shoulder and twirled her hair in her fingers. Soon she was snoring. Tim trudged alongside Grant. How you holding up, Tim? Okay, he said, but I think we might be in the Tyrannosaur area. I'm pretty sure we are. I hope we get out soon. You going to go into the woods? Tim said, as they came closer to. The woods seemed dark and forbidding. Yes, Grant said. I think we can navigate by the numbers on the motion sensors. The motion sensors were green boxes set about 4 feet off the ground. Some were freestanding. Most were attached to trees. None of them were working, because apparently the power was still off. Each sensor box had a glass lens mounted in the center and a painted code number beneath that. Up ahead in the mist-streaked moonlight, Grant could see a box marked TS-04. They entered the forest. Huge trees loomed on all sides in the moonlight. A low mist clung to the ground, curling around the roots of the trees. It was beautiful, but it made walking treacherous, and Grant was watching the sensors. They seemed to be numbered in descending order. He passed TS-03 and TS-02. Eventually they reached TS-01. He was tired from carrying the girl, and he had hoped this would coincide with a boundary for the Tyrannosaur paddock. But it was just another box in the middle of the woods. The next box after that was marked TN-01, followed by TN-02. Grant realized the numbers must be arranged geographically around a central point, like a compass. They were going from south to north, so the numbers got smaller as they approached the center and then get larger again. At least we're going the right way, Tim said. Good for you, Grant said. Tim smiled and stumbled over vines in the mist. He got quickly to his feet. They walked on for a while. My parents are getting a divorce, he said. Grant said. My dad moved out last month. He has his own place in Mill Valley now. He never carries my sister anymore. He never even picks her up. And he says you have dinosaurs on the brain, Grant said. Tim sighed. Yeah. You miss him, Grant said. Not really, Tim said. Sometimes she misses him more. Who, your mother? No, Lex. My mom has a boyfriend. She knows him from work. They walked in silence for a while, passing TN-03 and TN-04. Have you met him? Grant said. Yeah. How is he? He's okay, Tim said. He's younger than my dad, but he's bald. How does he treat you? I don't know. Okay. I think he just tries to get on my good side. I don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes my mom says we'll have to sell the house and move. Sometimes he and my mom fight late at night. I sit in my room and play with my computer, but I can still hear it. Grant said. Are you divorced? No, Grant said. My wife died a long time ago. And now you're with Dr. Sattler? Grant smiled in the darkness. No, she's my student. You mean she's still in school? Graduate school? Yes. Grant paused long enough to shift Lex to his other shoulder, and then they continued on, past TN-05 and TN-06. There was the rumble of thunder in the distance. The storm had moved to the south. There was very little sound in the forest, except for the drone of cicadas and the soft croaking of tree frogs. You have children? Tim asked. No, Grant said. Are you going to marry Dr. Sattler? No, she is marrying a nice doctor in Chicago, sometime next year. Oh, Tim said. He seemed surprised to hear it. They walked along for a while. Then who are you going to marry? I don't think I'm going to marry anybody, Grant said. Me neither, Tim said. They walked for a while. Tim said, Are we going to walk all night? I don't think I can, Grant said. We'll have to stop at least for a few hours. He glanced at his watch. We're okay. We've got almost 15 hours before we have to be back, before the ship reaches the mainland. Where are we going to stop? Tim asked immediately. Grant was wondering the same thing. His first thought was that they might climb a tree and sleep up there, but they would have to climb very high to get safely away from the animals. And Lex might fall out while she was asleep. And tree branches were hard. They wouldn't get any rest. At least he wouldn't. They needed someplace really safe, he thought, back to the plans he had seen on the jet coming down. He remembered that there were outlying buildings for each of the different divisions. Grant didn't know what they were like, because plans for the individual buildings weren't included, and he couldn't remember exactly where they were. But he remembered they were scattered all around the park. There might be buildings somewhere nearby, but that was a different requirement from simply crossing a barrier and getting out of the Tyrannosaur paddock. Finding a building meant a search strategy of some kind, and the best strategies were, Tim, can you hold your sister for me? I'm going to climb a tree and have a look around. High in the branches, he had a good view of the forest, the tops of the trees extending away to his left and right. They were surprisingly near the edge of the forest. Directly ahead, the trees ended before a clearing with an electrified fence and a pale concrete moat. Beyond that, a large open field in what he assumed was the sauropod paddock. In the distance, more trees and misty moonlight sparkling on the ocean. Somewhere he heard the bellowing of a dinosaur, but it was far away. He put on Tim's night vision goggles and looked again. He followed the gray curve of the moat, and then saw what he was looking for, the dark stripe of a service road, leading to the flat rectangle of a roof. The roof was barely above ground level. but it was there, and it wasn't far, maybe a quarter of a mile or so from the tree. When he came back down, Lex was sniffling. What's the matter? I heard an animal. It won't bother us. Are you awake now? Come on. He led her to the fence. It was 12 feet high, with a spiral of barbed wire at the top. It seemed to stretch far above them in the moonlight. The moat was immediately on the other side. Lex looked up at the fence doubtfully. Can you climb it? Grant asked her. She handed him her glove and a baseball. Sure, easy. She started to climb. But I bet Timmy can't. Tim spun in a fury. You shut up. Timmy's afraid of heights. I am not. She climbed higher. So, am not. Then come and get me. Grant turned to Tim, pale in the darkness. The boy wasn't moving. You okay with the fence, Tim? Sure. Want some help? Timmy's a fraidy cat, Lex called. What a stupid jerk, Tim said, and he started to climb. It's freezing, Lex said. They were standing waist deep in smelly water at the bottom of a deep concrete moat. They had climbed the fence without incident, except that Tim had torn his shirt on the coils of barbed wire at the top. Then they had all slid down into the moat, and now Grant was looking for a way out. At least I got Timmy over the fence for you, Lex said. He really is scared most times. Thanks for your help, Tim said sarcastically. In the moonlight he could see floating lumps on the surface. He moved along the moat, looking at the concrete wall on the far side. The concrete was smooth. They couldn't possibly climb it. Ew, Lex said, pointing to the water. It won't hurt you, Lex. Grant finally found a place where the concrete had cracked and a vine grew down toward the water. He tugged on the vine, and it held. His weight. Let's go, kids. They started to climb the vine, back to the field above. It took only a few minutes to cross the field to the embankment, leading to the below-grade service road and the maintenance building off to the right. They passed 2 motion sensors, and Grant noticed with some uneasiness that the sensors were still not working, nor were the lights. More than 2 hours had passed since the power first went out, and it was not yet restored. Somewhere in the distance, they heard the Tyrannosaur roar. Is he around here? Lex said. No, Grant said. We're in another section of the park from him. They slid down a grassy embankment and moved toward the concrete building. In the darkness, it was forbidding, bunker-like. What is this place? Lex said. It's safe, Grant said, hoping that was true. The entrance gate was large enough to drive a truck through it. It was filled with heavy bars inside. They could see. The building was an open shed with piles of grass and bales of hay stacked among equipment. The gate was locked with a heavy padlock. As Grant was examining it, Lex slipped sideways between the bars. Come on, you guys. Tim followed her. I think you can do it, Dr. Grant. He was right. It was a tight squeeze, but Grant was able to ease his body between the bars and get into the shed. As soon as he was inside, a wave of exhaustion struck him. I wonder if there's anything to eat, Lex said. Just hay. Grant broke open a bale and spread it around on the concrete. The hay in the center was warm. They lay down, feeling the warmth. Lex curled up beside him and closed her eyes. Tim put his arm around her. He heard the sauropods trumpeting softly in the distance. Neither child spoke. They were almost immediately snoring. Grant raised his arm to look at his watch, but it was too dark to see. He felt the warmth of the children against his own body. Grant closed his eyes and slept. Control. Muldoon and Gennaro came into the control room just as Arnold clapped his hands and said, "Got you, you little son of a bitch." "What is it?" Gennaro said. Arnold pointed to the screen. VGL equals get handle data DT temp cal in item temp. VG2 equals get handle dat itil temp cal item temp. If link VG1 VG2 set lim VG1 VG2 return. If link VG2 VG1 sets lim VG2 VG1 return. On White Rabbit OBJ, link sets security VG1 perimeter VG2. Limit-1 equals max bits 22% to limit 0.04 set on. Limit.2 equals set 0 set 50 limit.2 Vera diesel. On Finny object call link ST security perimeter set to on. To Finny object set link SST security perimeter restore. On Finny.obj delete line RF White Rabbit OBJ Finny object VG1 equals get handle that DT temp call item temp. VG2 equals get handle DT dash dot ITL temp call item temp. Limit.4 max bits 33% to limit 0.04 set on. Limit.5 set 0 set 50 limit 2 verisize. That's it, Arnold said, pleased. That's what? Gennaro asked, staring at the screen. I finally found the command to restore the original code. The command called Finny.obj resets the linked parameters, namely the fence and the power. Good, Muldoon said. But it does something else, Arnold said. It then erases the code lines that refer to it. It destroys all evidence it was ever there. Pretty slick. Gennaro shook his head. I don't know much about computers. Although he knew enough to know what it meant when a high-tech company went back to the source code. It meant big, big problems. Well, watch this, Arnold said, and he typed in the command Finny.obj. The screen flickered and immediately changed. VG1 equals get handle dat DD temp call item temp. VG2 equals get handle data int .itl temp call item temp. If link VG1 VG2 sets lim VG1 VG2 return. If link VG2 VG1 sets lim VG2 VG1 return. Limit.1 equals max bits 22% to limit 0.04 set on. Limit.2 set equals set 0 set 50 limit 0.2 verify. VG1 equals get handle dat DT temp call item temp. VG2 equals get handle data intel temp call equal item temp. Limit.4 equals max bits 33% to limit 0.04 set on. Limit.5 equals set 0 set 50 limit 2 versus. Muldoon pointed to the windows. Look, outside, the big quartz lights were coming on throughout the park. They went to the windows and looked out. Hot damn, Arnold said. Gennaro said, does this mean the electrified fences are back on? You bet it does, Arnold said. It'll take a few seconds to get up to full power, because we've got 50 miles of fence out there, and the generator has to charge the capacitors along the way. But in half a minute we'll be back in business. Arnold pointed to the vertical glass see-through map of the park. On the map, bright red lines were snaking out from the power station, moving throughout the park as electricity surged through the fences. And the motion sensors, General said? Yes, them too. It'll be a few minutes while the computer counts, but everything's working, Arnold said. 9:30, and we've got the whole damn thing back up and running. Grant opened his eyes. Brilliant blue light was streaming into the building through the bars of the gate. Quartz light, the power was back on. Groggily, he looked at his watch. It was just 9:30. He'd been asleep only a couple of minutes. He decided he could sleep a few minutes more, and then he would go back up to the field and stand in front of the motion sensors and rave, setting them off. The control room would spot him. They'd send a car out to pick him up and the kids up. He'd tell Arnold to recall the supply ship, and they'd all finish the night in their own beds back in the lodge. He would do that right away, in just a couple of minutes. He yawned and closed his eyes again. Not bad, Arnold said in the control room, staring at the glowing map. There's only 3 cutouts in the whole park. Much better than I hoped for. Cutouts, General said. The fence automatically cuts out short-circuited sections, he explained. You can see a big one here in Sector 12, near the main road. That's where the Rex knocks the fence down, Muldoon said. Exactly. And another one is here in Sector 11, near the sauropod maintenance building. Why would that section be out, Janelle said. God knows, Arnold said. Probably storm damage or a fallen tree. We can check it on the monitor in a while. The third one is over there by the Jungle River. Don't know why that should be out either. As Janelle looked, the map became more complex, filling with green spots and numbers. What's all this? The animals, the motion sensors are working again, and the computer's starting to identify the location of all the animals in the park, and anybody else too. Janelle stared at the map. You mean Grant and the kids? Yes. We set out such numbers above 400, so if they're out there moving around, Arnold said, the motion sensors will pick them up as additional animals. He stared at the map, but I don't see any additionals yet. Why does it take so long? Gennaro said. You have to realize, Mr. Gennaro, Arnold said, that there's a lot of extraneous movement out there. Branches blowing in the wind, birds flying around, all kinds of stuff. The computer has to eliminate all the background movement. It may take, okay, count's finished. Gennaro said, You don't see the kids? Arnold twisted in his chair and looked back to the map. No, he said. At the moment, there are no additionals on the map at all. Everything out there has been accounted for as a dinosaur. They're probably up in a tree or somewhere else where we can't see them. I wouldn't worry yet. Several animals haven't shown up, like the big Rex. That's probably because it's sleeping somewhere and not moving. The people may be sleeping too. We just don't know. Muldoon shook his head. We'd better get on with it, he said. We need to repair the fences and get the animals back into their paddocks. According to the computer, we've got 5 to herd back to the proper paddocks. I'll take the maintenance crews out now. Arnold turned to Gennaro. You may want to see how Dr. Malcolm is doing. Tell Dr. Harding that Muldoon will need him in about an hour to supervise the herding. And I'll notify Mr. Hammond that we are starting our final cleanup. Gennaro passed through the iron gates and went in the front door of the safari lodge. He saw Ellie Sattler coming down the hallway, carrying towels and a pan of steaming water. There's a kitchen at the other end, she said. We are using that to boil water for the dressings. How is he? Gennaro asked. Surprisingly good, she said. Gennaro followed Ellie down to Malcolm's room, and was startled to hear the sound of laughter. The mathematician lay on his back in the bed, with Harding adjusting an IV line. So the other man says, I'll tell you frankly, I didn't like it, Bill. I went back to toilet paper. Harding was laughing. It's not bad, is it? Malcolm said, smiling. Ah, Mr. Gennaro, you've come to see me. Now you know what happens from trying to get a leg up on the situation. Gennaro came in tentatively. Harding said, He's on fairly high doses of morphine. Not high enough, I can tell you, Malcolm said. Christ, he's stingy with his drugs. Did they find the others yet? No, not yet, Gennaro said. But I'm glad to see you're doing so well. How else should I be doing, Malcolm said, with a compound fracture of the leg that is likely septic and beginning to smell rather pungent. But I always say, if you can't keep a sense of humor. Gennaro smiled. Do you remember what happened? Of course I remembered, Malcolm said. Do you think you could be bitten by a Tyrannosaurus Rex and it would escape your mind? No, indeed, I'll tell you. You'd remember it for the rest of your life. In my case, perhaps not a terribly long time, but still, yes, I remember. Malcolm described running from the Land Cruiser in the rain and being chased down by the Rex. It was my own damned fault. He was too close, but I was panicked. In any case, he picked me up in his jaws. How? Gennaro said. Torso, Malcolm said, and lifted his shirt. A broad semicircle of bruised punctures ran from his shoulder to his navel. Lifted me up in his jaws, shook me bloody hard, and threw me down, and I was fine. Terrified, of course, but still and all, fine. Right up to the moment he threw me. I broke the leg in the fall, but the bite was not half bad, he sighed, considering. Harding said, most of the big carnivores don't have strong jaws. The real power is in the neck musculature. The jaws just hold on, while they use the neck to twist and rip. But with a small creature like Dr. Malcolm, the animal would have just shake him and then toss him. I'm afraid that's right, Malcolm said. I doubt I'd have survived, except the big chap's heart wasn't in it. To tell the truth, he struck me as a rather clumsy attacker, or of anything less than an automobile or a small apartment building. You think he attacked half-heartedly? It pains me to say it, Malcolm said, but I don't honestly feel I had his full attention. He had mine, of course, but then he weighs 8 tons. I don't. Gennaro turned to Harding and said, "They're going to repair the fences now," Arnold said. "Muldoon will need your help herding animals." "Okay," Harding said. "So long as you leave me Dr. Sattler and ample morphine," Malcolm said. "And so long as we do not have a Malcolm effect here." "What's a Malcolm effect?" Gennaro said. "Modesty forbids me," Malcolm said, "from telling you the details of a phenomenon named after me." He sighed again and closed his eyes. In a moment he was sleeping. Ellie walked out into the hallway with Gennaro. "Don't be fooled," she said. "It's a great strain on him. When will you have a helicopter here?" "A helicopter? He needs surgery on that leg. Make sure they send for the helicopter and get him off this island." The park. The portable generator sputtered and roared to life, and the quartz floodlights glowed at the ends of their telescoping arms. Muldoon heard the soft gurgle of the jungle river a few yards to the north. He turned back to the maintenance van and saw one of the workmen coming out with a big power saw. No, he said, "just the ropes, Carlos. We don't need to cut it." He turned back to look at the fence. They had difficulty finding the shorted section at first, because there wasn't much to see. A small protococcus tree was leaning against the fence. It was one of the several that had been planted in this region of the park. Their feathery branches intended to conceal the fence from view. But this particular tree had been tied down with guy wires and turnbuckles. The wires had broken free in the storm, and the metal turnbuckles had blown against the fence and shorted it out. Of course, none of this should have happened. Grounds crews were supposed to use plastic-coated wires and ceramic turnbuckles near fences, but it had happened anyway. In any case, it wasn't going to be a big job. All they had to do was pull the tree off the fence, remove the metal fittings, and mark it for the gardeners to fix it in the morning. It shouldn't take more than 20 minutes, and that was just as well, because Muldoon knew the Dilophosaurs always stayed close to the river, even though the workmen were separated from the river by the fence. The Dilos could spit right through it, delivering their blinding poison. "Ramon," one of the workmen came over. "Senor Muldoon," he said, "did you see the lights?" "What lights?" Muldoon said. Ramon pointed to the east. Through the jungle. "I saw it as we were coming out. It is there, very faint. You'll see it. It looks like the lights of a car, but it is not moving." Muldoon squinted. It probably was just a maintenance light. After all, power was back on. "We'll worry about it later," he said. "Right now, let's just get that tree off the fence." Arnold was in an expensive mood. The park was almost back in order. Muldoon was repairing the fence. Hammond had gone off to supervise the transfer of the animals with Harding. Although he was tired, Arnold was feeling good. He was even in a mood to indulge the lawyer, Gennaro. "The Malcolm effect," Arnold said. "You worried about that?" "I'm just curious," Gennaro said. "You mean you want me to tell you why Ian Malcolm is wrong?" "Sure." Arnold lit another cigarette. "It's technical. Try me." "Okay," Arnold said. "Cass theory describes non-linear systems. It's now become a very broad theory that's been used to study everything from the stock market to heart rhythms. A very fashionable theory, very trendy to apply it to any complex system where there might be unpredictability, okay? Okay, Janelle said. Ian Malcolm is a mathematician specialized in chaos theory. Quite amusing and personable. But basically, what he does, besides real black, is use computers to model the behavior of complex systems. And John Hammond loved the latest scientific fad, so he asked Malcolm to model the system at Jurassic Park, which Malcolm did. Malcolm's models are all phase space shapes on a computer screen. Have you seen them? No, Janelle said. Well, they look like a real twisted ship's propeller. According to Malcolm, the behavior of any system follows the surface of the propeller. You with me? Arnold held his hand in the air. Let's say I put a drop of water on the back of my hand. That drop is going to run off my hand. Maybe it'll run toward my wrist. Maybe it'll run toward my thumb or down between my fingers. I don't know for sure where it will go, but I know it will run somewhere along the surface of my hand. It has to. Okay, Janelle said. Chaos theory treats the behavior of a whole system like a drop of water moving on a complicated propeller surface. The drop may spiral down or slip outward toward the edge. It may do many different things depending, but it will always move along the surface of the propeller. Okay, Malcolm's models tend to have a ledge or sharp incline where the drop of water will speed up greatly. He modestly calls this speeding up movement the Malcolm effect. The whole system could suddenly collapse. And that was what he said about Jurassic Park. That it had inherently instability. Inherent instability, Janelle said. And what did you do when you got his report? We disagreed with it and ignored it, of course, Arnold said. Was that rise? It's self-evident, Arnold said. We are dealing with living systems, after all. This is life, not computer models. In the harsh quartz lights, the hypsilophodonts' green head hung down out of the sling, the tongue dangling, the eyes dull. Careful, careful, Hammond shouted as the crane began to lift. Harding grunted and eased his head back onto the leather straps. He didn't want to impede circulation through the carotid artery. The crane hissed as it lifted the animal into the air, onto the weighted flatbed truck. The Hipsy was a small dinosaur, 7 feet long, weighing about 500 pounds. She was dark green with mottled brown spots. She was breathing slowly, but she seemed all right. Harding had shot her a few moments before with a tranquilizer gun, and apparently he had guessed the correct dose. There was always a tense moment dosing these big animals. Too little and they would run off into the forest, collapsing where you couldn't get to them. Too much and they went into terminal cardiac arrest. This one had taken a single bounding leap and keeled over, perfectly dosed, "Watch it, easy," Hammond was shouting to the workman. "Mr. Hammond," Harding said, "please." "Well, they should be careful." "They are being careful," Harding said. He climbed up onto the back of the flatbed as the Hipsy came down, and he set her into the restraining harness. Harding slipped on the cardiogram collar that monitored heartbeat, then picked up the big electronic thermometer, the size of a turkey baster, and slipped it into the rectum. It beeped. 96.2 degrees. "How is she?" Hammond asked fretfully. "She's fine," Harding said. "She's only dropped 1.5 degrees. "That's too much," Hammond said. "Too deep." "You don't want her waking up and jumping off the truck," Harding snapped. Before coming to the park, Harding had been the chief of veterinary medicine at the San Diego Zoo, and the world's leading expert on avian care. He flew all over the world, consulting with zoos in Europe, India, and Japan on the care of exotic birds. He'd had no interest when this peculiar little man showed up, offering him a position in a private game park. But when he learned what Hammond had done, it was impossible to pass up. Harding had an academic bent in the prospect of writing the first textbook of veterinary, internal medicine, diseases of Dinosauria, was compelling. In the late 20th century, veterinary medicine was scientifically advanced. The best zoos ran clinics, little different from hospitals. New textbooks were merely refinements of old. For a world-class practitioner, there was no words left to conquer. But to be the first to care for a whole new class of animals, that was something. And Harding had never regretted his decision. He had developed considerable expertise with these animals, and he didn't want to hear from Hammond now. The Hipsy snorted and twitched. She was still breathing shallowly. There was no ocular reflex yet, but it was time to get moving. "All aboard!" Harding shouted. "Let's get this girl back to her paddock." "Living systems," Arnold said, "are not like mechanical systems. Living systems are never in equilibrium. They are inherently unstable. They may seem stable, but they are not. Everything is moving and changing. In a sense, everything is on the edge of collapse." Gennaro was frowning, but lots of things don't change. Body temperature doesn't change. All kinds of other body temperature changes constantly, Arnold said. Constantly. It changes cyclically over 24 hours, lowest in the morning, highest in the afternoon. It changes with mood, with disease, with exercise, with outside temperature, with food. It continuously fluctuates up and down, tiny jiggles on a graph, because at any moment some forces are pushing temperature up and other forces are pulling it down. It is inherently unstable, and every other aspect of the living system is like that too. "So you're saying Malcolm's just another theoretician," Arnold said, sitting in his office. He made a nice mathematical model, and it never occurred to him that what he saw as defects were actually necessities. "Look, when I was working on missiles, we dealt with something called resonant yaw. Resonant yaw meant that even though a missile was only slightly unstable off the pad, it was hopeless. It was inevitably going to go out of control, and it couldn't be brought back. That's a feature of mechanical systems. A little wobble can get worse until the whole system collapses. But those same little wobbles are essential to a living system. They mean the system is healthy and responsive. Malcolm never understood that. Are you sure he didn't understand that? He seems pretty clear on the difference between living and non-living. Look, Arnold said. The proof is right here. He pointed to the screens. In less than an hour, he said, the park will all be back online. The only thing I've got left to clear is the telephones. For some reason, they're still out. But everything else will be working. And that's not theoretical. That's a fact. The needle went deep into the neck, and Harding injected the medrin into the anesthetized female dinosaur. As she lay on her side on the ground, immediately the animal began to recover, snorting and kicking her powerful hind legs. Back, everybody, Harding said, scrambling away. Get back! The dinosaur staggered to her feet, standing drunkenly. She shook her lizard head, stared at the people standing back in the quartz lights, and blinked. She's drooling, Hammond said, worried. Temporary, Harding said. It'll stop. The dinosaur coughed and then moved slowly across the field, away from the lights. Why isn't she hopping? She will, Harding said. It'll take her about an hour to recover fully. She's fine. He turned back to the car. Okay, boys, let's go deal with the stego. Muldoon watched as the last of the stakes was pounded into the ground. The lines were pulled taut, and the Protocarpus tree was lifted clear. Muldoon could see the blackened charred streaks on the silver fence where the short head occurred at the base of the fence. Several ceramic insulators had burst. They would have to be replaced, but before that could be done, Arnold would have to shut down all the fences. Control, this is Muldoon. We are ready to begin repair. All right, Arnold said, shutting out your sections now. Muldoon glanced at his watch. Somewhere in the distance, he heard soft hooting. It sounded like owls, but he knew it was the Dilophosaurs. He went over to Ramon and said, "Let's finish this up. I want to get out. I want to get to those other sections of fence." An hour went by. Donald Gennaro stared at the glowing map in the control room. As the spots and numbers flickered and changed, what's happening now? Arnold worked at the console. I'm trying to get the phones back so we can call about Malcolm. No, I mean out there. Arnold glanced up at the board. It looks as if they're about done with the animals. In the two sections, just as I told you, the park is back in hand. With no catastrophic Malcolm effect. In fact, there's just that third section of fence. Arnold, it was Muldoon's voice. Yes? Have you seen this bloody fence? Just a minute. On one of the monitors, Gennaro saw a high angle down on the field of grass, blowing in the wind. In the distance was a low concrete roof. That's the sauropod maintenance building, Arnold explained. It's one of the utility structures we use for equipment, feed storage, and so on. We have them all around the park, in each of the paddocks. On the monitor, the video image panned. We're turning the camera now to get a look at the fence. Gennaro saw a shining wall of metallic mesh in the light. One section had been trampled, knocked flat. Muldoon's jeep and work crew were there. Huh? Arnold said. Looks like the Rex went into the sauropod paddock. Muldoon said. Fine dining tonight. We'll have to get him out of there, Arnold said. With what? Muldoon said. We haven't got anything to use on a Rex. I'd fix this fence, but I'm not going in there until daylight. Hammond won't like it. We'll discuss it when I get back, Muldoon said. How many sauropods will the Rex kill? Hammond said, pacing around the control room. Probably just one, Harding said. Sauropods are big. The Rex can feed off a single kill for several days. We have to go out and get him tonight, Hammond said. Muldoon shook his head. I'm not going in there until daylight. Hammond was rising up and down on the balls of his feet, the way he did whenever he was angry. Are you forgetting you work for me? No, Mr. Hammond, I'm not forgetting. But that's a full-grown adult tyrannosaur out there. How do you plan to get him? We have tranquilizer guns. We have tranquilizer guns that shoot a 20cc dot, Muldoon said. Fine for an animal that weighs 400 or 500 pounds. That tyrannosaur weighs 8 tons. It wouldn't even feel it. You ordered a larger weapon. I ordered 3 larger weapons, Mr. Hammond, but you cut the requisition, so we got only one, and it's gone. Nedry took it when he left. That was pretty stupid. Who let that happen? Nedry's not my problem, Mr. Hammond, Muldoon said. You're saying, Hammond said, that as of this moment, there is no way to stop the Tyrannosaur? That's exactly what I'm saying, Muldoon said. That's ridiculous, Hammond said. It's your park, Mr. Hammond. You didn't want anybody to be able to injure your precious dinosaurs. Well, now you've got a Rex. In with the sauropods, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. He left the room. Just a minute, Hammond said, hurrying after him. Gennaro stared at the screens and listened to the shouted argument in the hallway outside. He said to Arnold, I guess you don't have control of the park yet after all. Don't kid yourself, Arnold said, lighting another cigarette. We have the park. It'll be dawn in a couple of hours. We may lose a couple of dinos before we get the Rex out of there, but believe me, we have the park. Dawn. Grant was awakened by a loud grinding sound, followed by a mechanical clanking. He opened his eyes and saw a bale of hay whirling past him on a conveyor belt, up towards the ceiling. 2 more bales followed it. Then the clanking stopped as abruptly as it had begun, and the concrete building was silent again. Grant yawned. He stretched sleepily, wrenched in pain, and sat up. Soft yellow light came through the side windows. It was morning. He had slept the whole night. He looked quickly at his watch. 5 o'clock a.m. Still almost 6 hours to go before the boat had to be recalled. He rolled onto his back, groaning. His head throbbed, and his body ached as if he had been beaten up from around the corner. He heard a squeaking sound, like a rusty wheel, and then Lex giggling. Grant stood slowly and looked at the building. Now that it was daylight, He could see it was some kind of maintenance building, with stacks of hay and supplies. On the wall he saw a grey metal box and a stenciled sign, Sauropod Maintenance Building 04. This must be the sauropod paddock, as he had thought. He opened the box and saw a telephone, but when he lifted the receiver, he heard only hissing, static. Apparently, the phones weren't working yet. Chew your food, Lex was saying. Don't be a piggy, Ralph. Grant walked around the corner and found Lex, by the bars, holding out handfuls of hay to an animal outside that looked like a large pink pig, and was making the squeaking sounds Grant had heard. It was actually an infant triceratops, about the size of a pony. The infant didn't have horns on its head yet, just a curved bony frill. Behind big soft eyes, it poked its snout through the bars toward Lex, its eyes watching her as she fed it more hay. That's better, Lex said. There's plenty of hay. Don't worry. She patted the baby on the head. You like hay, don't you, Ralph? Lex turned back and saw him. This is Ralph, Lex said. He's my friend. He likes hay. Grant took a step and stopped, wincing. You look pretty bad, Lex said. I feel pretty bad. Tim, too. His nose is all swollen up. Where is Tim? Peeing, she said. You want to help me feed Ralph? The baby triceratops looked at Grant. Hay stuck out of both sides of its mouth, dropping on the floor as it chewed. He's a very messy eater, Lex said, and he's very hungry. The baby finished chewing and licked its lips. It opened its mouth, waiting for more. Grant could see the slender, sharp teeth and the beaky upper jaw like a parrot. Okay, just a minute, Lex said, scooping up more straw from the concrete floor. Honestly, Ralph, she said, you think your mother never fed you. Why is his name Ralph? Because he looks like Ralph at school. Grant came closer and touched the skin of the neck gently. It's okay, you can pet him, Lex said. He likes it when you pet him, don't you, Ralph? The skin felt dry and warm, with a pebble texture of a football. Ralph gave a little squeak as Grant petted it. Outside the bars, its thick tail swung back and forth with pleasure. He's pretty tame, Ralph looked from Lex to Grant as it ate, and showed no sign of fear. It reminded Grant that the dinosaurs didn't have ordinary responses to people. Maybe I can ride him, Lex said. Let's not. I bet he let me, Lex said. It'd be fun to ride a dinosaur. Grant looked out the bars past the animal to the open fields of the sauropod compound. It was growing lighter every minute. He should go outside, he thought, and set off one of the motion sensors on the field above. After all, it might take the people in the control room an hour to get out here to him. And he didn't like the idea that the phones were still down. He heard a deep snorting sound like the snort of a very large horse, and suddenly the baby became agitated. It tried to pull its head back through the bars, but got caught on the edge of its frill, and it squeaked in fright. The snorting came again, and was closer this time. Ralph reared up on its hind legs, frantic to get out from between the bars. It wiggled its head back and forth, rubbing against the bars. Ralph, take it easy, Lex said. Push him out, Grant said. He reached up to Ralph's head and leaned against it, pushing the animal sideways and backwards. The frill popped free and the baby fell outside the bars, losing its balance and flopping on its side. Then the baby was covered in shadow, and a huge leg came into view, thicker than a tree trunk. The foot had 5 curved toenails, like an elephant's. Ralph looked up and squeaked. A head came down into view, 6 feet long with 3 long white horns, one above each of the large brown eyes, and a smaller horn at the tip of the nose. It was a full-grown Triceratops. The big animal peered at Lex and Grant, blinking slowly, and then turned its attention to Ralph. A tongue came out and licked the baby. Ralph squeaked and rubbed up against the big leg happily. "Is that his mom?" Lex said. "Looks like it," Grant said. "Should we feed the mom too?" Lex said. But the big Triceratops was already nudging Ralph with her snout, pushing the baby away from the bars. "Guess not." The infant turned away from the bars and walked off. From time to time the big mother nudged her baby, guiding it away as they both walked out into the fields. "Goodbye, Ralph," Lex said, waving. Tim came out of the shadows of the building. "Tell you what," Grant said. "I'm going up on the hill to set off the motion sensors, so they'll know to come get us. You two stay here and wait for me." "No," Lex said. "Why stay here? It's safe here." "You're not leaving us," she said. "Right, Timmy?" "Right," Tim said. "Okay," Grant said. They crawled through the bars, stepping outside. It was just before dawn. The air was warm and humid, the sky soft pink and purple. A white mist clung low to the ground. Some distance away they saw the mother Triceratops and the baby moving away toward a herd of large duck-billed hadrosaurs, eating foliage from the trees at the edge of the lagoon. Some of the hadrosaurs stood knee-deep in the water. They drank, lowering their flat heads, meeting their own reflections in the still water. Then they looked up again, their heads shriveling at the water's edge. One of the babies ventured out, squeaked, and scrambled back, while the adults watched indulgently. Farther south, other hadrosaurs were eating the lower vegetation. Sometimes they reared up on their hind legs, resting their forelegs on the tree trunks, so they could reach the leaves on higher branches, and in the far distance a giant apatosaur stood above the trees, the tiny head shriveling on the long neck. The scene was so peaceful, Grant found it hard to imagine any danger. "Yeah!" Lex shouted, ducking. 2 giant red dragonflies with 6-foot wingspans hummed past them. "What was that?" "Dragonflies," he said. "The Jurassic was the time of huge insects." "Do they bite?" Lex said. "I don't think so," Grant said. Tim held out his hand. One of the dragonflies lighted on it. He could feel the weight of the huge insect. "He's going to bite you," Lex warned. But the dragonfly just slowly flapped its red-veined, transparent wings, and then, when Timmy moved his arm, flew off again. Which way do we go?" Lex said. "There." They started walking across the field. They reached a black box mounted on a heavy metal tripod, the first of the motion sensors. Grant stopped and waved his hand. in front of it, back and forth. But nothing happened. If the phones didn't work, perhaps the sensors didn't work either. We'll try another one, he said, pointing across the field. Somewhere in the distance, they heard the roar of a large animal. Ah, hell, Arnold said. I just can't find it. He sipped coffee and stared bleary-eyed at the screens. He had taken all the video monitors offline in the control room. He was searching the computer code. He was exhausted. He'd been working for 12 straight hours. He turned to Rue, who had come up from the lab. Find what? The phones are still out. I can't get them back on. I think Nedry did something to the phones. Rue lifted one phone. Heard hissing. Sounds like a modem. But it's not, Arnold said, because I went down into the basement and shut off all the modems. What you're hearing is just white noise. That sounds like a modem transmitting. So the phone lines are jammed? Basically, yes. Nedry jammed them. Very well. He's inserted some kind of lockout into the program code. And now I can't find it. Because I gave that restore command, which erased part of the program listings. But apparently the command to shut off the phones is still resident in the computer memory. Rue shrugged. So just shut down the system down, and you'll clear memory. I've never done it before, Arnold said, and I'm reluctant to do it. Maybe all the systems will come back on startup, but maybe they won't. I'm not a computer expert, and neither are you. Not really. And without an open phone line, we can't talk to anybody who is. If the command is RAM resident, it won't show up in the code. You can do a RAM dump and search that, but you don't know what you're searching for. I think all you can do is reset. Janelle stormed in. We still don't have any telephones? Working on it. You've been working on it since midnight, and Malcolm is nervous. He needs medical attention. It means I'll have to shut down, Arnold said. I can't be sure everything will come back on. Gennaro said, Look, there's a sick man over in that lodge. He needs a doctor or he'll die. You can't call for a doctor unless you have a phone. 4 people have probably died already. Now shut down and get the phones working. Arnold hesitated. Well, Gennaro said. Well, it's just the safety system don't allow the computer to be shut down and then turn the goddamn safety systems off. Can't you get it through your head that he's going to die unless he gets help? Okay, Arnold said. He got up and went to the main panel and opened the doors and uncovered the metal swing latches over the safety switches. He popped them off one after another. You asked for it, Arnold said, and you got it. He threw the master switch. The control room was dark. All the monitors were black. The 3 men stood there in the dark. How long do we have to wait? Gennaro said. 30 seconds, Arnold said. P.U., Lex said, as they crossed the field. What? Grant said. That smell, Lex said. It stinks like rotten garbage. Grant hesitated. He stared across the field toward the distant trees, looking for movement. He saw nothing. There was hardly a breeze to stir the branches. It was peaceful and silent in the early morning. I think it's your imagination, he said. It's not. Then he heard the honking sound. It came from the herd of duck-billed hadrosaurs. Behind them, first one animal, then another, and another, until the whole herd had taken up the honking cry. The duckbills were agitated, twisting and turning, hurrying out of the water, circling the young ones to protect them. They smell it too, Grant thought. With a roar, the tyrannosaur burst from the trees 50 yards away near the lagoon. It rushed out across the open field. With huge strides, it ignored them, heading toward the herd of hadrosaurs. "I told you," Lex screamed. "Nobody listens to me." In the distance, the duckbills were honking and starting to run. Grant could feel the earth shake beneath his feet. "Come on, kids." He grabbed Lex, lifting her bodily off the ground, and ran with Tim through the grass. He had glimpses of the tyrannosaur down by the lagoon, lunging at the hadrosaurs, which swung their big tails in defense. It honked loudly and continuously. He heard the crashing of foliage and trees, and when he looked over again, the duckbills were charging. In the darkened control room, Arnold checked his watch. 30 seconds. The memory should be cleared up by now. He pushed the main power switch back on. Nothing happened. Arnold's stomach heaved. He pushed the switch off, then on again. Still nothing. He felt sweat on his brow. "What's wrong?" Janelle said. "Oh, hell," Arnold said. Then he remembered. You had to turn the safety switches back on before you restarted the power. He flipped on the 3 safeties and covered them again with the latch covers. Then he held his breath and turned the main power switch. The room lights came on. The computer beeped. The screens hummed. "Thank God," Arnold said. He hurried to the main monitor. There were rows of labels on the screens. Jurassic Park. Systems Startup. Startup AB0. Startup CND. Security main. Monitor main. Command main. Electrical main. Set grids DNL. View VBM. Access TNL. Heating cooling. Critical locks. Telecom VBV. Reset revert. Emergency illumin. Control pass-through. Telecom RSD. Template main. FNC programs. Hydraulic main. Master main. Zoolog main. Drawer folder interface. SAG R&D. Repair storage. Gas VLD. Main 2. Common interface. Status main. Explosion fire hazard. Schematic main. Safety health main. Gennaro reached for the phone, but it was dead. No static hissing this time. Just nothing at all. "What's this?" "Give me a second," Arnold said. "After I reset, all the systems modules have to be brought online manually." Quickly, he went back to work. "Why manually?" Gennaro said. "Will you just let me work, for Christ's sake?" Ryu said. "The system is not intended to ever shut down. So if it does shut down, it assumes that there is a problem somewhere. It requires you to start up everything manually. Otherwise, if there were a short somewhere, the system would start up and short out, start up again, short out again, in an endless cycle." "Okay," Arnold said. "We're going." Gennaro picked up the phone and started to dial, when he suddenly stopped. "Jesus, look at that," he said, pointing to one of the video monitors. But Arnold wasn't listening. He was staring at the map, where a tight cluster of dots by the lagoon had started to move in a coordinated way, moving fast in a kind of stroll. "What's happening?" Gennaro said. "The duckbills," Arnold said earnestly. "They've stampeded." The duckbills charged with surprising speed, their enormous bodies in a tight cluster, honking and roaring, the infants squealing and trying to stay out from underfoot. The herd raised a great cloud of yellow dust. Grant couldn't see the tyrannosaur. The duckbills were running right toward them. Still carrying Lex, he ran with Tim toward a rocky outcrop with a stand of big conifers. They ran hard, feeling the ground shake beneath their feet. The sound of the approaching herd was deafening, like the sound of jets at an airport. It filled the air and hurt their ears. Lex was shouting something, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. And as they scrambled onto the rocks, the herd closed in around them. Grant saw the immense legs of the first hadrosaurs that charged past each animal, weighing 5 tons, and then they were enveloped in a cloud so dense he could see nothing at all. He had the impression of huge bodies, giant limbs, battering cries of pain as the animals reeled and circled. One duckbill struck a boulder and it rolled past them, out into the field beyond. In the dense cloud of dust, they could see almost nothing beyond the rocks. They clung to the boulders, listening to the screams and honks, the menacing roar of the tyrannosaur. Lex dug her fingers into Grant's shoulder. Another hadrosaur slammed its big tail against the rocks, leaving a splash of hot blood. Grant waited until the sounds of the fighting had moved off to the left, and then he pushed the kids to start climbing the largest tree. They climbed swiftly, feeling for the branches as the animals stampeded all around them. In the dust, they went up 20 feet, and then Lex clutched at Grant and refused to go farther. Tim was tired too, and Grant thought they were high enough. Through the dust, they could see the broad backs of the animals below as they reeled and honked. Grant propped himself against the coarse bark of the trunk, coughed in the dust, closed his eyes, and waited. Arnold adjusted the camera as the herd moved away. The dust slowly cleared. He saw that the hadrosaurs had scattered, and the tyrannosaur had stopped running, which could only mean it had made a kill. The tyrannosaur was now near the lagoon. Arnold looked at the video monitor and said, "Better get Muldoon to go out there and see how bad it is." "I'll get him," Gennaro said, and left the room. The park. A faint crackling sound, like a fire in the fireplace. Something warm and wet tickled Grant's ankle. He opened his eyes and saw an enormous beige head. The head tapered to a flat mouth shaped like the bill of a duck, the eyes protruding above the flat duck bill were gentle and soft like a cow's. The duck mouth opened and chewed branches on the limb where Grant was sitting. He saw large, flat teeth in the cheek. The warm lips touched his ankle again as the animal chewed. The duck-billed hadrosaur. He was astonished to see it up close. Not that he was afraid. All the species of duck-billed dinosaurs were herbivorous, and this one acted exactly like a cow. Even though it was huge, its manner was so calm and peaceful, Grant didn't feel threatened. He stayed where he was on the branch, careful not to move, and watched as it ate. The reason Grant was astonished was that he had a proprietary feeling about this animal. It was probably a myosaur from the late Cretaceous in Montana. With John Horner, Grant had been the first to describe the species. Myosaurs had an upcurved lip, which gave them the appearance of smiling. The name meant good mother lizard. Myosaurs were thought to protect their eggs until the babies were born and could take care of themselves. Grant heard an insistent chirping, and the big head swung down. He moved just enough to see the baby hadrosaur scampering around the feet of the adult. The baby was dark beige with black spots. The adult bent her head low to the ground and waited unmoving while the baby stood up on its hind legs, resting its front legs on the mother's jaw, and ate the branches that protrude from the side of the mother's mouth. The mother waited patiently until the baby had finished eating, and dropped back down to all fours again. Then the big head came back up toward Grant. The hadrosaur continued to eat just a few feet from him. Grant looked at the two elongated air holes on top of the flat upper bill. Apparently the dinosaur couldn't smell Grant, and even though the left eye was looking right at him, for some reason the hadrosaur didn't react to him. He remembered how the tyrannosaur had failed to see him the previous night. Grant decided on an experiment. He coughed. Instantly, the hadrosaur froze. The big head suddenly still. The jaws no longer chewing. Only the eye moved, looking for the source of the sound. Then after a moment, when there seemed to be no danger, the animal resumed chewing. Amazing, Grant thought, sitting in his arms. Lex opened her eyes and said, "Hey, what's that?" The hadrosaur trumpeted in alarm. A loud resonant honk that so startled Lex that she nearly fell out of the tree. The hadrosaur pulled its head away from the branch and trumpeted again. "Don't make her mad," Tim said from the branch above. The baby chirped and scurried beneath the mother's legs. As the hadrosaur stepped away from the tree, the mother cocked her head and peered inquisitively at the branch, where Grant and Lex were sitting, with its upturned smiling lips. The dinosaur had a comical appearance. "Is it dumb?" Lex said. "No," Grant said. "You just surprised her." "Well," Lex said, "is she going to let us get down or what?" The hadrosaur had backed 10 feet away from the tree. She honked again. Grant had the impression she was trying to frighten them away, but the dinosaur didn't really seem to know what to do. She acted confused and uneasy. They waited in silence, and after a minute, the hadrosaur approached the branch again, jaws moving in anticipation. She was clearly going to resume eating. "Forget it," Lex said. "I am not staying here." She started to climb down the branches. At her movement, the hadrosaur trumpeted in fresh alarm. Grant was amazed. He thought, "It really can't see us when we when we don't move. And after a minute, it literally forgets that we're here. This was just like the Tyrannosaur, another classic example of an amphibian visual cortex. Studies of frogs had shown that amphibians only saw moving things, like insects. If something didn't move, they literally didn't see it. The same thing seemed to be true of dinosaurs. In any case, the Myosaur now seemed to find these strange creatures climbing down the tree too upsetting. With a final honk, she nudged her baby and lumbered slowly away. She paused once and looked back at them, then continued on. They reached the ground. Lex shook herself off. Both children were covered in a layer of fine dust. All around them, the grass had been flattened. There were streaks of blood and a sour smell. Grant looked at his watch. "We better get going, kids," he said. "Not me," Lex said. "I am not walking out there any more." "We have to." "Why?" "Because," Grant said, "we have to tell them about the boat. Since they can't seem to see us on the motion sensors, we have to go all the way back ourselves. It's the only way." "Why can't we take the raft?" Tim said. "What raft?" Tim pointed to the low concrete maintenance building with the bars where they had spent the night. It was 20 yards away across the field. "I saw rafts back there," he said. Grant immediately understood their advantages. It was now 7 o'clock in the morning. They had at least 8 miles to go. If they could take a route along the river, they would make much faster progress than going overland. "Let's do it," Grant said. Arnold punched the visual search mode and watched as the monitors began to scan throughout the park. The images changing every 2 seconds. It was tiring to watch, but it was the fastest way to find Nedry's jeep, and Muldoon had been adamant about that. He had gone out with Gennaro to look at the stampede, but now that it was daylight, he wanted the car found. He wanted the weapons. His intercom clicked. "Mr. Arnold, may I have a word with you, please?" It was Hammond. He sounded like the voice of God. "You want to come here, Mr. Hammond?" "No, Mr. Arnold," Hammond said. Come to me. I am in the genetics lab with Dr. Wu. We'll be waiting for you." Arnold sighed and stepped away from the screens. Grant stumbled deep in the gloomy recesses of the building. He pushed past 5-gallon containers of herbicide, tree pruning equipment, spare tires for the Jeep coils, a cyclone fencing, 100-pound fertilizer bags, stacks of brown ceramic insulators, empty motor oil cans, work lights and cables. "I don't see any raft." "Keep going." Bags of cement, length of copper pipe, green mesh, and 2 plastic oars hung on the clips on the concrete wall. "Okay," he said, "but where's the raft?" "It must be here somewhere," Tim said. "You never saw a raft?" "No, I just assumed it was here." Poking among the junk, Grant found no raft, but he did find a set of plans, rolled up and speckled with mold from humidity, stuck back in the metal cabinet on the wall. He spread the plans on the floor, brushing away a big spider. He looked at them for a long time. "I'm hungry. Just a minute." They were detailed topographical charts for the main area of the island, where they now were. According to this, the lagoon narrowed into the river they had seen earlier, which twisted northward, right through the aviary, and on to within a half a mile of the visitor lodge. He flipped back through the pages. How to get to the lagoon? According to the plans, there should be a door at the back of the building. They were in. Grant looked up and saw it recessed back in a concrete wall. The door was wide enough for a car. Opening it, he saw a paved road running straight down toward the lagoon. The road was dug below ground level, so it couldn't be seen from above. It must be another service road, and it led to a dock at the edge of the lagoon, and clearly stenciled on the dock was raft storage. "Hey," Tim said, "look at this." He held out a metal case to Grant. Opening it, Grant found a compressed air pistol and a cloth belt that held dots. There were 6 dots in all, each as thick as his finger, labeled Morrow 709. "Good work, Tim." He slung the belt around his shoulder and stuck the gun in his trousers. "Is it a tranquilizer gun?" "I'd say so." "What about the boat?" Lex said. "I think it's on the dock," Grant said. They started down the road. Grant carried the oars on his shoulder. "I hope it's a big raft," Lex said, "because I can't swim." "Don't worry," he said. "Maybe we can catch some fish," he said. They walked down the road, with a sloping embankment rising up on both sides of them. They heard a deep rhythmic snorting sound, but Grant could not see where it was coming from. "Are you sure there's a raft down here?" Lex said, wrinkling her nose. "Probably," Grant said. The rhythmic snorting became louder as they walked, but they also heard a steady droning buzzing sound. When they reached the end of the road at the edge of the small concrete dock, Grant froze in shock. The Tyrannosaur was right there. It was sitting upright in the shade of a tree, its hind legs stretched out in front. Its eyes were open, but it was not moving, except for its head, which lifted and fell gently with each snorting sound. The buzzing came from the clouds of flies that surrounded it. Crawling over its face and slack jaws, its bloody fangs, and the red haunch of a killed hadrosaur that lay on its side behind the Tyrannosaur. The Tyrannosaur was only 20 yards away. Grant felt sure it must have seen him, but the big animal did not respond. It just sat there. It took him a moment to realize the Tyrannosaur was asleep, sitting up but asleep. He signaled to Tim and Lex to stay where they were. Grant walked slowly forward onto the dock in full view of the Tyrannosaur. The big animal continued to sleep, snoring softly. Near the end of the dock, a wooden shed was painted green to blend with the foliage. Grant quietly unlatched the door and looked inside. He saw a half-dozen orange life vests hanging on the wall, several rolls of wire mesh fencing some coils of rope, and 2 big rubber cubes sitting on the floor. The cubes were strapped tight with flat rubber belts, rafts. He looked back at Lex. She mouthed, "No boat?" He nodded, "Yes." The Tyrannosaur raised its forelimb to swipe at the flies buzzing around its snout, but otherwise it did not move. Grant pulled one of the cubes out onto the dock. It was surprisingly heavy. He freed the straps, found the inflation cylinder. With a loud hiss, the rubber began to expand, and then with a hissy rap, it popped fully open on the dock. The sound was fearfully loud in the ears. Grant turned, stared up at the dinosaur. The Tyrannosaur grunted and snorted. It began to move. Grant braced himself to run, but the animal shifted its ponderous bulk, and then it settled back against the tree trunk and gave a long growling belch. Lex looked disgusted, waving her hands in front of her face. Grant was soaked in sweat from the tension. He dragged the rubber raft across the dock. It flopped into the water with a loud splash. The dinosaur continued to sleep. Grant tied the boat up to the dock and returned to the shed to take out 2 life preservers. He put these in the boat and then waved for the kids to come out onto the dock. Pale with fear, Lex waved back no. He gestured yes. The Tyrannosaur continued to sleep. Grant stabbed in the air with an emphatic finger. Lex came silently, and he gestured for her to get into the raft. Then Tim got in, and they both put on their life vests. Grant got in and pushed off. The raft drifted silently out into the lagoon. Grant picked up his paddles and fitted them into the oarlocks. They moved farther down the dock. Lex sat back and sighed loudly with relief. Then she looked stricken and put her hand over her mouth. Her body shook with muffled sounds. She was suppressing a cough. She always coughed at the wrong times. Lex, Tim whispered fiercely, looking back toward the shore. She shook her head miserably and pointed to her throat. He knew what she meant. A tickle in her throat. What she needed was a drink of water. Grant was rowing and Tim leaned over the side of the raft and scooped his hand in the lagoon. Holding his cupped hand toward her, Lex coughed loudly, explosively in Tim's ears. The sound echoed across the water like a gunshot. The Tyrannosaur yawned lazily and scratched behind its ear with his hind foot, just like a dog. It yawned again. It was groggy after its big meal, and it woke up slowly. On the boat, Lex was making little gargling sounds. Lex, shut up, Tim said. I can't help it, she whispered, and then she coughed again. Grant rowed hard, moving the raft powerfully into the center of the lagoon. On the shore, the Tyrannosaur stumbled to his feet. I couldn't help it, Timmy, Lex shrieked miserably. I couldn't help it. Shh! Grant was rowing as fast as he could. Anyway, it doesn't matter, she said. We're far enough away. He can't swim. Of course he can swim, you little idiot, Tim shouted at her. On the shore, the Tyrannosaur stepped off the dock and plunged into the water. It moved strongly into the lagoon, after them. Well, how should I know, she said. Everybody knows Tyrannosaurs can swim. It's in all the books. Anyway, all reptiles can swim. Snakes can't. Of course snakes can, you idiot. Settle down, Grant said. Hold on to something. Grant was watching the Tyrannosaur, noticing how the animal swam. The Tyrannosaur was now chest deep in the water, but it could hold its big head high above the surface. Then Grant realized the animal wasn't swimming. It was walking because, moments later, only the very top of the head, the eyes, the nostrils, protruded above the surface. By then, it looked like a crocodile, and it swam like a crocodile, swinging its big tail back and forth so the water churned behind it. Behind the head, Grant saw the hump of the back and the ridges along the length of tail. as it occasionally broke the surface. Exactly like a crocodile, he thought unhappily. The biggest crocodile in the world. I'm sorry, Dr. Grant wailed. I didn't mean it. Grant glanced over his shoulder. The lagoon was no more than 100 yards wide here, and they had almost reached the center. If he continued, the water would become shallow again. The Tyrannosaur would be able to walk again, and he would move faster in shallow water. Grant swung the boat around and began to row north. What are you doing? The Tyrannosaur was now just a few yards away. Grant could hear its sharp, snorting breath as it came closer. Grant looked at the paddles in his hands, but they were very light plastic, not weapons at all. The Tyrannosaur threw its head back and opened its jaws wide, showing rows of curved teeth, and then in a great muscular spasm, lunged forward to the raft, just missing the rubber gunwale. The huge skull slapping down the raft, rocking away on the crest of the splash. The Tyrannosaur sank below the surface, leaving gurgling bubblers. The lagoon was still. Lex gripped the gunwale handles and looked back. Did he drown? No, Grant said. He saw bubbles, then a faint ripple along the surface, coming toward the boat. Hang on, he shouted, as the head bucked up beneath the rubber, bending the boat and lifting it into the air, spinning them crazily before it splashed down again. Do something, Alexis screamed. Do something! Grant pulled the air pistol out of his belt and looked pitifully small in his hands. But there was the chance that if he shoot the animal in the sensitive spot in the eye or the nose, the Tyrannosaur surfaced beside the boat, opened its jaws and roared. Grant aimed and fired. The dart flashed in the light and smacked into the cheek. The Tyrannosaur shook its head and roared again. And suddenly they heard an answering roar, floating across the water toward them. Looking back, Grant saw the juvenile T-Rex on the shore, crouched over the killed sauropod, claiming the kill as its own. The juvenile slashed at the carcass, then raised its head high and bellowed. The big Tyrannosaur saw it too, and the response was immediate. It turned to protect its kill, swimming strongly toward the shore. He's going away, Lex squealed, clapping her hands. He's going away, na 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 na, stupid dinosaur. From the shore, the juvenile roared defiantly. Enraged, the big Tyrannosaur burst from the lagoon at full speed, water streaming from its enormous body. As it raced up the hill, past the dock, the juvenile ducked its head and fled, its jaws still filled with ragged flesh. The big Tyrannosaur chased it, racing past the dead sauropod, disappearing over the hill. They heard its final threatening bellow, and then the raft moved to the north, around the bend in the lagoon, to the river. Exhausted from rowing, Grant collapsed back, his chest heaving. He couldn't catch his breath. He lay gasping in the raft. Are you okay, Dr. Grant? Lex said. From now on, will you just do what I tell you? Okay, she sighed as if he had just made the most unreasonable demand in the world. She trailed her arm in the water for a while. You stopped rowing, she said. I'm tired, Grant said. Then how come you're still moving? Grant sat up. She was right. The raft drifted steadily north. There must be a current. The current was carrying them north, toward the hotel. He looked at his watch and was astonished to see it was 15 minutes past 7. Only 15 minutes had passed since he had last looked at his watch. It seemed like 2 hours. Grant lay back against the rubber gunwales, closed his eyes, and slept.